All right, guys, I'm really excited to be here. So I think the first question I'll ask is, how many of you use GraphQL? How many, boy? Okay, that's interesting. So I'm giving the right talk. So authentication and authorization is it's like a very small talk. So I looked at the other speakers' presentations and I discovered that nobody else was giving the GraphQL talk. So I just said that's fine. So I'm just gonna like take a GraphQL from the client to the server and back to authorization and authentication. Is that fine? All right. So let's get started. And I'm happy that I'm the last person to speak. So I think I can take all the time in the world. All right. Just a little info about me. I live in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm sure Lagos is very popular. If you Google Lagos now, you see like, I'm sure almost everybody here knows about Lagos one way or the other. And then Nigeria is playing tomorrow in the World Cup, so I'm really excited. You guys should support Nigeria tomorrow if you don't have anything to support. So yeah. Okay, so I'm a principal jollof rice advocate. Jollof rice is like a very great Nigerian dish. And then if you look at the origin of jollof rice, you discover the Ghanaians love jollof rice. Senegalese, they cook jollof rice. The Nigerians too also cook jollof rice. And there has been a budding jollof rice war over the years. And I think Nigeria is leading right now. So this is part of my efforts to make sure Nigeria just stays on top. So you guys can try it sometime. I'm sure they have like places in New York where they sell jollof rice. I'm yet to find one though. I'm also a community developer advocate. What that simply means is I love the community a lot. I'm Nigerian, I'm African, so I do my best to make sure like we have other developers like me or better than me in the community. So I co-run a developer community called Follow Africa with a guy called Ridwan and then some other people on the board of trustees. Right now, Follow Africa is in about 6 African countries: Nigeria, Ghana, Rwanda, Uganda, and then we are going to Zambia later in July. And then I co-run Laravel Nigeria and also Angular Nigeria. These are very large Nigerian African communities, and I'm really excited that I'm doing my best to co-run these communities. And then lastly, I'm an open source engineer on the Apollo team. How many of you know of Apollo GraphQL? Yeah, that's great. So, and you can find me on GitHub at Unicode Developer. You can also find me on Twitter. I like to say I tweet a lot, like on a per second billing. So if you check my timeline right now, maybe I tweeted like 1 minute before this event. So you can try to follow me if I'm interesting, or you just check my timelines for technical stuffs. So let's get started. So where do we start from, actually? Like I said before, I wanted to just talk about authentication and authorization, but I discovered that some people in the room might not know about GraphQL, so it just makes sense for me to take GraphQL, like do the overview of GraphQL from like the client to the server, why you need GraphQL. These days, we have a lot of data, okay? And then we have so many clients consuming this data because many of the applications we build these days are like data-driven apps, right? So as developers, we are always looking for like the latest tech, the latest libraries, or like the best frameworks to employ in using, in making sure we have like the best infrastructure for fetching data or like updating data in our applications. Now, if you look at the previous question, how many clients we consume the data? These are all the clients you have in the 21st century, right? You have IoT, you have you have your web apps, you have your mobile apps, you have like your wristwatches too, also that are connecting to web services. You have your Google Home or your Amazon Echo, and you have your Oculus and all of that. So these are all clients that are communicating or they're trying to fetch data from a service, or they're trying to get the data updated on the device. So now these are all the interactions they are having with like external services. How do you ensure that you are fetching the right data and that you're fetching it in the most efficient way? We have REST. How many of you use REST or have used REST one point of it? Very good. How many of you have used gRPC? I think we are very young in this room. Very good. All right, so I think many of us just use REST. And now, REST is effective, but over time you discover that REST is not enough for you to like fetch your data efficiently. Why? because you discover that when you're building building new features in your product, you discover that when you start to build new features, you have to add new endpoints to all the existing endpoints you have, right? And then also when you're querying data, you have to query multiple endpoints for the data, all right? So you want to query tweets, and then when you get the tweets, you have to query for maybe the quoted tweets or the information under the tweets. So that's a lot of endpoints for you to gather just to get your data. And then you have more round trips to the server to fetch data. And then when you want to version, look at how the APIs are. If you want to overhaul your API, you have to come with V2 or version 3 or version 4. So you have your API having 5 or 7 versions, and then in your documentation you're specifying that, oh, please use version 5 now, don't use version 2 anymore. But there we cannot duplicate version 2 because we already have some old clients that's using data from version 2, right? So you have all these problems. How do you get past all these? Someone said an API isn't useful if it isn't predictable. We'll get back to this code very soon. All right, so how do you fetch data effectively? Prosper can be anybody, can be any developer. I just use my name here since I'm giving this presentation. So let's take a very good example of how you would use REST and you use GraphQL. So you have your REST client, right? And you have a server, a REST server that is where you build your APIs. Okay, look at the way it's requesting data, right? You're trying to get assets from an album. You say get /albums/id/assets. And then when you fetch data, you have to make another GET request to what? Assets/assets ID and comments. But look at the GraphQL end. Just in one request, you're making requests to fetch assets and also fetch the comments. So this is just one request, and it's getting all that data back to you, to the client that is consuming the data. Just one request. Meanwhile, on the rest, you're making multiple requests just to get the data that you need. So I'm sure you're already seeing something is very different here. And the approach from GraphQL is kind of faster and better for fetching of data just with these two diagrams. So let's just continue, and then you see a clearer difference. So what's GraphQL essentially? GraphQL is a query language for APIs. It was open sourced about 3 years ago, by Facebook. And also, you discovered that companies like Netflix are also working on something closer to GraphQL called Falcor for efficient fetching of data. I don't really know anything about Falcor, but the bit I know about GraphQL is what I'm talking about. So when you look at GraphQL, it's just a flexible system for describing data requirements and fetching data for your client-server applications. And then it's a specification. So it's not a framework, it's not a library, it's just a specification. You have various implementations of the specification. So you have the GraphQL JS library, and then you have different people that have implemented the server implementations. Then you have the clients too. You have Apollo clients, you have the Relay clients, you have URQL, and all those different implementations. So as we go on in this talk, you see some of these clients and some of the servers and how to use them. All right. So the first thing, very simple, is to build a schema on the server. Normally, if you're dealing with your REST applications or just your normal applications, you have your database, and then you have your models, and then you call it a schema when you're talking about your models, right? So for GraphQL, you just build a schema on the server, and this is an example of a schema. So you have the author type, you have a book type, you have a query, okay? And the query has methods that just fetch information from the different types. So that's an example of a small schema on the server. But how does the client work? It's very simple too. So look at the client. This is how you make the query on the client. So if you want to get author with books also, you just make a query. You call the author method with, this is passing a variable. You just specify the ID you want to retrieve, and it retrieves the email, retrieves the name. And then also, like I said, because it's GraphQL, in just one query, you can also get the books that the author has authored. And then with the books, you can also get the details of the books. All right. Now, if you are doing that with REST, that's multiple endpoints already that you have to query. But here, you're just making just one request, and you're getting all the data you need. So this is data sent back to the client, right? You have a data key node. It brings out the author information. Then within the author information, you have the books information. Now, within the books, you can see the details of the book, right? Now, the book is a schema, it's a schema type of its own that has its own fields. Then you can see the fields just within that single query. So so you can go deep, as deep as you want. Books, inside of books, you call another one and call another one, and everything will just come together in just one ball of query. you don't have to make multiple queries. All right, so by default, when you run a GraphQL server, it ships with the GraphQL playground, which is very, very interesting to use, okay? When you're dealing with your REST APIs, normally you use Postman, right? Or I don't know which other one is more popular than Postman. I'm sure everybody has Postman installed for retrieving your APIs and checking the authorization headers and all of that good stuff. So with the GraphQL playground, it's very easy. Just type in your query. That's an existing server actually. You can try it on your laptop. Full stack workshop server glitch.me. So if you put in this query, it just retrieve the result for you. And as you're testing and building your schema, you can just be trying this on your own and be getting the results, almost like Postman. So GraphQL on the server. Like I said, GraphQL is an implementation, right? It's a spec, sorry. But then you need implementations of this GraphQL. So for GraphQL on the server, you can use what you call Apollo server, okay? And Apollo server, the API is very simple. You require the Apollo server, you provide the type definitions. The type definitions is exactly your schema, okay? And then you have the resolvers. The resolvers are called, you call them resolver functions, okay? So resolver functions are functions that you use to retrieve data for every field on your schema, okay? Now, once you just instantiate Apollo server, you can call the listen method on server, and then it runs your GraphQL server. It's as simple as this. So for hello world, for hello is a function, it's a resolver function in your query. You can see the hello field on your schema. So you have a resolver function for each field on your schema, and then you go ahead and do whatever you want to do on the resolver function. So in most instances, you are retrieving something from like a data source, maybe a REST API or a Postgres database or like a Redis data store, anyone you want to do. So this is just a typical example of using Apollo server. And then you can find more details on our docs. Now, GraphQL on the client. So you have tools like Apollo Client. Apollo Client is one of the, permits me to say, one of the best clients out there, if not the best right now. Yeah, because it takes care of a lot of things for you out of the box. You know, when you're even also trying to do like state management with like Redux and all the, the Redux plugins, the Redux Tonk and all those several stuff. With Apollo clients and then with Apollo Link State, you can actually just take care of this. This Apollo Link State just takes care of everything out of the box, all right? So you specify your query. Get doc photo is your query. So Apollo client ships with a query component, also ships with a mutation component. That once you call the query component, like you see in the example, you can assign your query to the query prop of the query component. And then it has an efficient error mechanism system. So once you just call the render prop, you have loading state, the error state, and the data state. So from loading, as your result is loading, you can specify whatever you want it to specify there. Maybe you can specify a placeholder that just shows a spinner or something while it loads the result. And then if there's an error, you can return any error message you want, and then you can go ahead and return and get the data from the data node in the option there. So it helps you to like fetch your data declaratively, and you can do all sorts of stuff you want within the render prop. It also, like I said, it also has a mutation component. It also has like so many other components that you can check out from the docs whenever you're free. So that's the link to the docs. And that link will actually show you how to like use the React Apollo, which is an implementation on top of Apollo client. And then you have also Vue Apollo, you have Angular Apollo that you can just pull in for your respective like frameworks. Or you can just decide to use Apollo clients directly, anyone you want. Now, this is like the part I love so much, performance and query tracking. I don't know why query is not showing very well, but screen resolution, I guess. Now, the same way you build apps, right, and you have to measure everything, because as developers, our work is never done. Your work is never done. When you push something, when you make a release, there's always a bug, there's always a feature, and you have to test everything. You always, if you work in like maybe a large organization, you guys are always testing everything. You're A/B testing everything, or your project manager is on you to test everything, right? Now we have what you call Apollo Engine. This is what I call Apollo Engine. Apollo Engine is almost like New Relic for GraphQL applications. How many of you use New Relic in the house? Almost, yeah, a lot. Or you use Google Analytics, right? So New Relic catches almost everything in your application, right? Catches the exception. You can see what was happening. What part of your application that users are getting errors on, what type of your application needs to be optimized and all of that. So for GraphQL applications, you have Apollo Engine. Now with Apollo Engine is a platform that allows you to check how all the queries in your GraphQL app is doing. So you can check how many queries are running. You can check the queries that are running very slow and optimize. You can set them up with Slack. You can also perform what you call performance caching on Apollo Engine. So everything, login, error handling, and all of that stuff that you do with New Relic, you can do with Apollo Engine for your GraphQL platform. So if you hook in Apollo Engine to your Apollo server, everything just reports straight from your GraphQL app to Apollo Engine. So once you open the dashboard, you can see everything, how all your queries are doing, the different components, the components that are messing up, the components that need optimization, and all of those good things, and then you can fix them easily with Apollo Engine. So Apollo Engine is, it also does what you call schema analysis. So all the schemas in your apps, it takes all the schema and analyzes all the schemas and the fields. So you can check out how every field and how all your schemas in your app, are actually responding to the different queries that are made to them. So you can check out more information on the docs, and then you can sign up for Apollo Engine if you want. But check out the docs first, see if you like it, and then you can sign up if you want. So this is just an overview of everything, okay? You have your GraphQL layer, which is your Apollo server. Now, in your Apollo server can connect to a DB via the resolver, or you can connect to a REST implementation. You can connect to, just maybe a simple method that is connected to another database. So you can connect to all these different services, and then you have your clients that are querying the schemas on the server. Okay, now for your clients, you can use Apollo Client. Like I said, Apollo Client has so many implementations on top of it. You can, if you are building a React app, you can use React Apollo. If you are building a Vue app, you can use Vue Apollo. Or you can decide to just use Apollo Client itself and then make the request. It queries your server and then returns the result to your clients, and then use it to display it on your app. And then you can hook in Apollo Engine in between. So Apollo Engine just catches everything from the client request to fetching data from the schema or updating the schema, and then make sure that your application, it catches all the errors. You can understand how your app is performing and all of those good stuff. So now to the main meat of this talk, authentication and authorization. Sorry, I've forgotten his name. You talked about cracking JWT, right? So we're going to be talking about JWT here too. I hope you guys have enough knowledge to crack this one too. Okay, so let's get started with this. So there are different ways of going about authentication and authorization in your GraphQL apps, okay? So I'm just going to talk about some of these ways to go about it and the ones that are better. Right now in the community, we don't really have like a preferred approach, okay? And also, even if there is a preferred approach, one thing I've discovered about development or software development, I've just been developing for like maybe 5 years now, discovered that the best practices become the outdated practices like in a minute. So if I recommend something to you now, tomorrow, something will come up and say, oh, this is the new way of doing it. And an example of that is React. Like when I was learning how to code, they told us to separate everything. Separation of concerns. Let your CSS be in a different file. Let your JavaScript be in a different file. Unobtrusive JavaScripting. That's what they told us, right? I read the books. But then React came up and said, put everything together in one application. Put everything together and then use it, because they are now going to be doing what you call componentized architecture. And then we have to move on with it, right? I don't know what's going to come out tomorrow. So right now I'm just going to show you the different approaches and then choose the one that works for you. You can try this approach. If it works for you, keep on using it. If it doesn't work for you, you can check the second approach. All right, so when you're building your REST API, especially when you're building Node.js APIs, you must have come across this one way or the other. Like, this is the way you set up your middleware, okay? You get your token. Your token is sent from the client to the server. Or you can use an authorization server like Auth0. Auth0 signs your token and then sends it back to you, right? Now, you get your token via your request headers, or you get it from the query from the request, or you get it from the body. Now, when you get the token, you verify, is this token legit, or has this token been hijacked by somebody across the way? Then you check it with the secret that you used to sign it. If it is legit, you go ahead and add it to the request, and then you pass it to the next control. But if it's not legit, you throw an error and say what? Unauthorized access, right? Or mismatch token or something like that. So this is the way you typically do it in a REST API. Now, with that knowledge, let's go ahead and see how you can do it in GraphQL. So in GraphQL, there's something we call the context object. Okay, you're going to see it in the code samples very soon. So what you do is you can build the context object with the information from the request headers. Like I said, when you set up your GraphQL server, you're setting up your Node.js server, and then you're using Apollo server. Now you can pass in the request into what you're passing to the Apollo server, which you're going to see very soon. So this is an example implementation. Look at the implementation very well. So that's Apollo server that we're requiring on the server, okay? And then we are passing in 3 arguments to Apollo server, to the constructor. We are passing in the type definitions, which is your schema itself. You're passing in the resolvers, and then you're passing in the context. Now, from the context, you can see what's happening. You have the request that is going in the context. Now, from the request, we are retrieving the access token from the headers or from the authorization, right? And then you're calling a method called getUserWithScopes. What getUserWithScopes does is just it extracts the value from the token. So getUserWithScopes, we extract the user with the scopes attached to the user from the token. Now, look at it very well. You see, if the user is not valid, it throws an authentication error. It must be logged in. Else, it appends the user object to the context object. So you have to understand that. It appends the user object to the context object. Almost like the way you do it in your REST API, where you just append everything to the request object. But here you're appending it to the context object. So you're going to see how to make use of this in my next slide. So just have it in mind now that we have context the user object. So now the good thing about the context object is that it's passed to every single resolver at every point of your schema. So you can always access the context object. So when you can access the context object, you can access anything that is within the context object, as we are going to see very soon. So one way of doing authentication is doing it within the resolver level. And then you're going to see it now. Resolvers have the ability to check the user rules. All right. So this is an example of a resolver. You have your query. Now, get horror movies is a resolver function, okay? Now, within the resolver function, you can see the 3 arguments it's taking: the root, the args, and the context object that we built from the previous, from Apollo server itself, right? Now, the context object has the user object attached to it. So within the user object, you have the row key. So see what is happening here. In my opinion, I feel people under 18 should not be watching horror movies, right? Then people over 50 should not be watching horror movies because of hypertension. Yes, so we are building an app to make sure that if you are getting the horror movies, your role is very important here. Some people can call it scope. I just decided to use role in this example. So now the role is over 18 under 50. So when it gets the request and it extracts the user object, which has the role in it, it checks. If row.includes over 18 under 15, what happens? Fetch horror movies. So it assigns the ID of the user to, and fetches the horror movies and assigns it to that user. So it knows that this is the user that is logged in, and then the user can have access to the horror movies. So now that particular user has access to horror movies. Okay, so let's move on. Now you can do this, but then if you have built GraphQL apps, if you are building GraphQL apps at the moment, you discover that you always have several resolver functions, right? Are you going to be doing the same logic for all the resolver functions you have? That's very repetitive, right? And we want to avoid, duplicating code in our code base. So what can we do to avoid this? Write once, call it anywhere and everywhere. This feels like Java. Remember what they say? Write once, run everywhere. But JavaScript is the new Java now, right? Write once, run it everywhere. Okay. So this is what you do. So you can extract the authorization logic into a function of its own. So look at the function up there. In the function, we have the row, the expected row, which I named the expected value, and the controller. So the controller is where the business logic is. So then you check. You check for the expected value. The expected value in this case is what? Over 18, under 50. So it can be anything, right? So you check. If the role is legit, if it has the role within the expected value, go ahead and call the business logic, which is the controller.apply. Now, if you look at the controller there, you have controller is equal to model.fetch horror movies. So it goes ahead to implement fetching of the horror movies. But then, if the role does not exist, it throws what you call a forbidden error that says you are not authorized to do this. Then look at how we call it in the resolver. So we just call what? Check role. So for every resolver where you need some level of authorization to allow the user to fetch data, you can just call what? The check role function. And then instead of having to repeat the code, you just call, you have the code written once and you just call it everywhere in your resolver. Now, take note of the forbidden error. Where is forbidden error coming from? We're going to see that now. So forbidden error is coming from Apollo server itself. Normally, if you have handled errors in GraphQL, some of you might have used what you call Apollo errors package. I don't know, some of you might have used that. But with Apollo server, you don't actually have to use any extra package because Apollo server 2.0 RC, which just came out today, because it was Apollo server 2.0 beta before now. But RC is out, so you can clap, don't worry, you can clap. Yeah. So there are so many new features with the release candidates, but let's talk about error handling for now, right? So now it comes, with all these errors: authentication error, forbidden error, bad user input error, then the generic Apollo error that you can use to implement the type of specific error you want to, especially for all the other developers on your team to always use. So because we are dealing with authorization now, if you look at the code before, we're using authentication error, like at the beginning when we were building the context object. But now, within this authorization check, we're using the forbidden error that says what? You are not authorized to do this. So if you query this schema now, and then the user does not have the correct role, in the result that is returned to you from the GraphQL playground or from the application itself, you will see the forbidden error there, and you see the message: you are not authorized to do this. So look at the second code there, forbidden error from the Apollo server. So you can import authentication error, you can import bad user input error, or you can use the generic Apollo error. So if you check the documentation, you can see more info about these errors. All right, what's the second way of doing it? The first way we did it in our resolvers, but now another method of performing authorization is delegating it to the models itself, and then you're going to see how this works. So you can clog your resolvers with like the logic for fetching data or mutating data, or you can decide to move them to your models. But moving them to your models is the recommended way, because if you are implementing everything within the resolvers, you have so much going on within the resolvers, which can be very confusing. But if you move them to the models, then you are making, clean code, like our previous speaker talked about. So let's look at the example. This is a very good example. Remember the context object? We are going back to context object. All right. So we're getting the scopes. If it does not exist, we throw an authentication error. But then you can return, remember, in the previous example, we are returning the user. That means we're adding user to the context object. But now we are not just adding user to the context object. We are adding some other things. We are adding user and we are adding models. But then within the models, we have the user model. And the user model has the value of the generate user model. So generate user model is actually the file that contains all the model functions for the user. So look at it. We are passing the user, which has the roles or which has the scopes, into the generate user model file. Don't worry, I'm going to show you the generate user model file now. Now, this is how the generate user model file looks like. So within the generate user model file, you have all the user functions, all the user model functions. Now, within these functions, an example is the get all. So inside the get all, you're not doing your authorization. So if user.roles includes admin, return null. And if user.roles does not include admin, return null. But if it includes the specific stuff you're looking for, you should go ahead and fetch the data that we need. So the third way of going about this is via custom directives. How many of you use directives very well? Because GraphQL itself ships with its own directives, right? But then you can create custom directives. If you use GraphQL tools a lot, you discover it has like a lot of functionality that you can use to create custom directives. So one way of going about authorization is by creating a custom directive that you can just apply on the schema level or apply on the schema field level. So you can apply a directive to the schema itself. So let us say type user. Type user, is one of the fields in your schema. One of your schema types. You can apply the directive to type user itself, or you can apply the authentication directive to what? To a user field. And this is a good example. This is just a very small, simple example because custom directives can be very complex. So you have to read about it to be able to understand how this works. So you have a directive called auth, okay? And you have said, okay, require role. Now, by default, the default value for role is what? Admin. But then you have an enums that can define the type of role: admin, reviewer, user, unknown. Now, when you create this auth directive, you can just apply it on the user type, or you can decide to apply it on the field itself, okay? But then, like I said, creating the directives itself can be very complex. So I included a link to the article that explains how you can actually create your own custom directives. So if you check that link, if you go to the docs, you have a lot of examples on how to create your own custom directive. I could have included the code here, but it's a lot of code. And if I try to shorten it, it will just make you confused. So you can check this out, and you can learn how to create custom directives, which you can also use to create the custom auth directive for your schema. Then finally, or the last approach is authentication outside GraphQL, which is very funny because we're talking about authentication and authorization inside GraphQL, right? Like I said, there are no hard and fast rules. If you try to adhere to one particular rule and it doesn't work for you, break the rule. That's why we're developers, right? Break the rule, then come for the next BuzzJS and tell us how you broke the rule. It becomes the new best practice. Am I right? That's what we're talking about. So now, how do you perform authorization outside GraphQL instead of you performing the authorization within the GraphQL layer? You can just, I'll give you an example. So, like I said, GraphQL helps you fetch your data, declaratively, helps you fetch it, in just one trip, and then makes the whole thing faster, right? Now, you can connect your GraphQL layer to an existing REST API instead of using it over REST. You can connect it to an existing REST API. If your REST API already has an authorization check baked in, why would you want to perform authorization again within the GraphQL layer? Makes no sense. You just want to what? I don't know the right word to call it now, but if your REST API, if you're connected to a REST API that already has authorization baked in, what you can just do is this. It's very simple. This is an example, again, the context object. I don't know, this context is so popular right now. I've been using it so much. Anyways, the context object, you pass in the request, right? Now, again, you're returning what? User and the models. Now, look at what's happening. We are passing the request directly to what? To the model. Okay? We're just passing in the request. We're not doing anything. We're passing it to the model. But then, in the model, you can see what's happening. We are not acting on the request. We are passing the request again to what? To the logic that's happening within the model. Now, for get all simply what? Connects to a REST API somewhere. So the get all function, which is meant to be like the business logic, connects to what? getbuzzjs.com/shopping spree. I hope this becomes functional, but right now this is fictitious. But the organizers are here so you guys can make it work. Now, for get all, you connect to getbuzzjs.com/shopping spree, and then it passes the request.headers, and it goes ahead to request. So shopping spree is an API endpoint that already has authorization baked in. So because it already has authorization baked in, we don't need to do our own. We just pass the request, and it goes ahead and do its stuff, and we let it go. So that's all about authentication and authorization. So one last thing, I know I just have maybe 4 minutes left. I'm from Africa, and I'm very passionate about this topic for the next billion users. So and when I talk about for the next billion users, I'm talking about scaling and performance, okay? In Lagos where I stay, here you can check your network speed and then you're getting 100 MB per second, 200, that's luxurious. Very, very, for me. Because where I am in Lagos, I'm getting 2 Mbps, 5 Mbps. Maybe if God smiles on a day, I get 10 Mbps. right? That's how crazy the internet is, right? And then the internet is also very expensive. So the way I use apps is very different. One, my battery must be on saving mode because of electricity, and then I make sure I am not, the way I purchase my data too is different from the way you guys use data here. Like, data is cheap, right? Yeah, it's pegged. So when you're building apps, I always take performance into consideration. So how do you do GraphQL for the next billion users? It's just one stuff I want to talk about, which is what we are working on the Apollo team. And then when we are finally done, it's going to change everything. Don't worry. GraphQL on the edge. How many of you know about the new Worker platform on Cloudflare? So Cloudflare is working on a new Worker platform that allows you to do a lot of crazy stuff on the CDN. I mean, virtually everybody's app here goes through a CDN. And majority of people use Cloudflare, because Cloudflare is like the boss in this, like one of the bosses in this industry, right? So imagine you being able to, when you push all your stuff to the CDN, and then you can still make stuff work on the CDN on the edge. So we are working on something at Apollo that allows you to be able to run GraphQL servers on Cloudflare Worker platform. And well, now, with this GraphQL on the edge, apart from you being able to run Apollo server on Cloudflare's new Worker platform, it allows you to cache whole query responses from within your Cloudflare CDN. And then it's completely serverless. So I'm not going to talk about it too much. But if you are really interested in this, you should sign up. Don't waste time. You should sign up, because it's going to be released very soon, and then we're going to, of course, you have like early access customers and all of that. So, which is going to change the way GraphQL works for your app, especially if your app is serving like a lot of users, because now your GraphQL app is going to be extremely fast, and then your data fetching is going to be like extremely fast, and your query, your responses will be cached automatically within the CDN, and like a lot of other good stuffs coming to this platform. So thank you very much. You guys have been a very great audience. So just more information. If you want to know more about JWT, Auth0 has a JWT handbook they made, that when you read this book, it will allow you to be able to understand how JSON Web Tokens work, and then also prevent prevent somebody from cracking your JWT like they did this morning. And then if you want to know more about Apollo and GraphQL, you can check the docs. We have now we are working on guides and best practices. So if you check the docs, by the left-hand sidebar, you see what you call the guides. So we have guides on access control, on security, on schema design, and several other stuff that you do with GraphQL. So check them out. You can check them out now. You can also give us feedback. You can tweet about it, and let's make GraphQL a better place. Thank you very much.
So we have time for a few questions, if anybody has any questions. Anybody wants to point me at questions?
So a lot of the use cases that you dealt with authenticated on a per query level. How would you handle authentication in a single query? So let's say you had a query that could be run both by an admin and a regular user, but they would return different data, let's say based on their authentication.
Okay. So if you're running a query, the query has to pass through a resolver function, right? And then from what I said, if you want this, you want different data for different roles, right?
For different roles, yeah, but the same query. So a lot of the authorization rules would prevent, let's say, a single query from running if you didn't have the role. But what if you wanted the same query to run for both, but return different sets of data?
Okay, so if you want the same query to return different sets of data for different roles?
For different roles, yeah.
I think you can just delegate that to your models, actually, because you have your model methods that are actually returning different data based on the methods and method name, whatever you call it. So if you actually perform that authorization for that query within those model methods, I think you'll be able to still return different data for for different roles.
Any other questions? No. Okay, so thank you very much again. So appreciate it. Before you go, also we're going to have, I think that's definitely worth another.